Tabletopped will start after the following messages.
Hey you, welcome to Forge of Lore, where we tell stories through Dungeons & Dragons.
Let me tell you a story about Thorin. Thorin is littered with the abandoned remnants of an ancient, high-tech civilization. Under the miles-long robot stands the largest city any of you have ever seen. We join 4 Thorins in their adventure through this strange world.
Have this teddy bear. It looks like it's been stabbed with a giant sword.
I might have nearly stolen your woman.
Oh, that'd be hot. I'd be okay with that.
One of my costume mustaches, I put that into someone's pocket. You get a mustache.
It seems like you all have fun.
Is that the word?
I'm not sure.
Our YouTube channel can be found at forgeoflore.com. The audio-only podcast is available on all major podcast apps. New episodes every Wednesday at 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. UK.
Welcome back to Tabletop, everyone. My name is Nick, your host, and today we are talking to Matt Copelli, the creator of the podcast Roleplay Chat. It's a podcast where every other week he sits down with members of the TTRPG community to chat about everything roleplay games. He's super smart, and in fact, you'll probably hear me on his podcast fairly soon, where we had a really great conversation. He also works as an interviewer for the Rising Tide Discord community, and also you can find a lot of his writing about TTRPGs and reviews online. Just search his name. Welcome, Matt. How's it going?
It's great. Wow, what a nice intro you did for me there, Nick. And I like to think that I'm smart, but having other people validate it for me is always great.
Yeah, right. It's like I know I'm not supposed to crave the validation of others, but I do.
Yeah, it feels good. It feels good. Yeah, no, I'm super jazzed. I'm really excited to chat games with you tonight. I'm excited.
I mean, the big news right now is just like all the Pinkerton WotC stuff, but you know what? We're going to talk about something way better and more interesting today, which is plot hooks in campaigns. How do you get your players interested into the next adventure? Or if you're starting out, how do you get that initial interest peaked with your players? But before that, let's talk a little bit about Roleplay Chat. Can you kind of give me a rundown of what your podcast is all about? And honestly, it kind of feels like a really great companion podcast to this one. Both of them are very like conversation centric and focused on like the nitty gritty of running games and like what they're all about and storytelling, which I just am obsessed with. And I'm glad I found a fellow person in that sphere. So tell us a little bit about the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. So like you said, Roleplay Chat it's a discussion podcast. It's a tabletop RPG discussion podcast where me and members of the community, including yourself, sit down and chat about games. So it's very similar to Tabletop in that sense. I've had the pleasure of talking to some really, some people that I would consider to be my heroes in the space. Got to talk to Brennan Lee Mulligan.
Which is just wild. Can you tell that story? How did that happen?
Honestly, when it happened, I thought I was getting punked because I got an email from, I guess, his agent.
Yeah.
Or even, I think it was his agent's assistant who sent me an email. And it was basically just like really simple bodied text saying, "Hey, have you heard of Brennan Lee Mulligan?" And I'm like, yes. Where's this going? Does he want me to like promote something for him? Or I don't know.
Yeah.
I answered. And then I went through a series of different agents to finally be asked, like, he wants to appear on your show. Is that okay? And this was before I even had guests on Roleplay Chat.
Yeah.
It was just me and my co-host Chris, who is no longer in the picture.
Mm-hmm.
We're still great friends, but he just, he didn't want to do this anymore. Stuff happens, life happens. And we were both like completely shocked at the situation. And we were like, oh my God, what do we do? Our format isn't really meant to have guests. I guess we're going to figure it out as we go. And it was really a trial by fire, but having him there, talking to him, he's as great of a guy and as insightful as, as you think. Only have good things to say about Brennan. He's a stand-up guy.
You hear that, everyone? You as well could listen to the podcast that Brennan Lee Mulligan listens to and wanted to be on. It was so good. So go and subscribe to Roleplay Chat. Pull it up right now and do it. We'll wait. But Matt, let's start talking a little bit about plot hooks. So you sort of actually pitched this as an option to me as one of the things we could have talked about when I came on your podcast. We kind of decided to do something different, but this one just kind of stuck in my mind because I was like, yeah, this is so important. Can you kind of give me what your feelings for, like, how do you define a plot hook when you're sitting down to GM? Like, what does that entail?
Yeah. And, you know, the reason why I wanted to talk to you about this, Nick, was because I think plot hooks, on the surface, they seem so simple. You know, it's just a device to help push the party towards a quest, to help direct them in some way. Maybe you misdirect them, maybe you don't. But anyway, at a very simple basis, it's something that's just helping you as a game master hook their interest towards something. But as you peel behind the layers, there's so many intricacies about how a hook gets started, how long a hook gets baked, you know, the consequences that might come out of a hook, things like that. So I'm really excited to talk to you about all those things tonight. I think I don't know if you agree with that.
No, I totally do. I'm glad that you brought up the intricacy of it, because when I was thinking about this, the kind of classic, I feel like there's like a spectrum of plot hook. There are the pretty abrupt and forceful plot hooks that kind of force a party to do something, and those are great. Everyone uses them in pretty much every campaign, and we can talk about that in a second as well. But the more the better designed plot hooks are the ones that don't even feel like you as the GM saying, hey guys, go do this. It's more like all the players kind of look at each other and say, you guys think we should go to that castle? We've been hearing about it a lot, and like there's been some disappearances. We should just check it out. Like, you know, like that sort of thing is to me as a GM, if I'm like sitting down and trying to get them interested in an overarching story, and I'm sort of giving them plot hooks to keep progressing them along the path, that is so important to like not make it feel like you're grabbing their head and sort of like puppeting them one way or another.
Yeah. Or having them kind of combined, right? Like that's why I think we need to give thought to our plot hooks, because if I'd like to think that every person probably has a standard way that they deliver material to their table. And regardless of whether that's very abrupt and straightforward, or, you know, maybe you already have the like really long thought out seeding and the more natural feeling plot hooks. But I think we owe it to ourselves as game masters to think about our preferred way of delivering that, so that we can kind of give a variety to our players. It's kind of fun as a player to have, you know, the NPC approach them and be super direct and say, hey, I heard you were able to clear out that dungeon. I need your help. The cemetery is overrun. I don't know what to do. Come, it's urgent. But the party has that, but they're also competing with, like in your example, that castle that they keep hearing about. They think it's a threat. They're not sure. So to have this really cool combination of plot hooks that are delivered in a variety of ways, I think it really makes the gears go in a player's head. Like, should I really trust this random NPC about the graveyard? Is it really that important? Or is Matt or is Nick just trying to mess with me?
That's the thing that I also think is worth talking about, is the psychology on the player side, because I can't tell you how often I've been like, hey, this bartender approaches you and says, oh, glad that you made it out of the rain safe. A lot of folk have been going missing recently. It's been a little dangerous out there. And then the whole party's like, this bartender's suspicious. And I'm like, no, guys, come on. So I think that there's a whole thing about like another layer that it's like, okay, I know my party pretty well. Do I think that they're going to take this bait in a way that I think that it will like be good. They can take it in other way, and part of that is just us as game masters, as you said, having to roll with that. One of the co-hosts, Franco and Daniel, both of them have used this example of like, you say the keep is dangerous right now. The noble's gone mad. He's been dragging in, like digging up bodies from the cemetery and dragging them into the castle, and we don't know what's happening. And then one of them, like one of your players, is like, I grab the closest horse and I ride south. And you're sort of like, okay, build a new character, I guess.
Yeah.
So I think that there is like a level of psychology that, like, of course, like the players have to work with you to a certain extent, but there's also, like you said, a lot of ways that plot hooks can go wrong just through misinterpretation or anything like that. So on a base level, what do you think a good plot hook contains? If you were to like try
Yeah.
to make it into like an alchemical formula, this
Yeah.
plus
Yeah.
this equals
Sure.
plot hook.
I mean, feel free to add to this ingredient list, Nick. But I think that a strong plot hook has, first of all, it's clear. It's
Mhm.
clear to the party what's being requested of them in order to begin said adventure. I think a strong plot hook also has a sense of timing. So you've
Mhm.
got clarity, timing, right? It doesn't always have to be urgent. Not all
Mhm.
plot hooks have to be do it right now or the world catches on fire. It could be something like, you know, this one farmer, his sheep kind of are going missing.
Yeah.
He's not freaked out about it, but there's these reports going on of the farmer's sheep going missing. This one town, it's starting to ramp up.
Yeah.
It can have like anyway, I'm rambling. Clarity, timelines, and then I think it's also gonna have. I like to include some kind of misdirection in there. So
Mm.
the hook itself isn't fully complete.
Yeah.
Go to this place to learn more, or
Mhm.
go talk to this NPC. They need your help. It's not the whole picture. It kind of leaves an air of mystery there that makes it easier for me as a game master to mold it to be relevant
Mhm.
when needed. Um, I think I'll stick with those three things. I'm sure there's other stuff, but
Yeah, I think that those are all really great. I think so. We've been talking a lot about heists this month, and those are so, like, all of those are so important. Basically, if you're trying to entice your players into a job, what you need is what they're doing, where they're going,
mhm.
and like you said, a time frame is super important. And like you said, it doesn't have to be like tomorrow you have to hit this bank. It can be like, in 2 weeks the diamond is going to be gone. We have to do it before then, kind of
Yeah.
thing. um so I think that this is all like super applicable to the sort of heist format as well. I will say though that one time, maybe my most successful plot hook ever, um i sort of I sort of used an encounter to entice them into something where they went into this like potion shop essentially, and we're talking to the alchemist there. And as they were leaving, they saw this guy like walk in with like a sort of like a hood and a little like pin that had like a red corsair, like a crosshair kind of thing on it. And they kind of like bumped into him and were like, "Oh, sorry." And the guy was basically going in to buy a potion that the shopkeeper had already said, like, "Oh, I have to make this. It's like a really tight schedule, but like I'm kind of like afraid of the people that we're doing this for."
Mm.
And the guy had bought that potion and said, like, "Hey, I'm going to give you double the price. I'll just buy it. You don't have to deal with them." And they were like, "Okay." So he walked out with the potion that was going to be sold. When they came back into that area, like a half hour later, the shop was on fire, and they
Hmm.
saw like the shadow of somebody in the upper floor. And when they like rushed in, they found the alchemist essentially tied to a chair, and like another person who had stayed outside saw this kind of shadowy figure with this pin walk into the shadows. And then they were like, "What the hell? We talked to this NPC. We like were treated well by her, and also." Like what was the deal with that pin guy? Like why was he like described so detailed? And so I think that you can use the power of the narration and the narrator's perspective to be like, "Oh, that's really weird, right? This like clue that is this
Yeah.
pin it kind of
And
seems like it's important.
yeah, I really like that example, Nick, because I think it touches on another piece of the equation that
Mhm.
I don't think we talked about up until now, and it's making sure that the hook is motivating to the players,
Yes,
right?
actually, that's so important. Yeah,
Because you don't want it, and it'll depend on the table. So this is where people listening kind of have to use your own experiences to help
your judgment.
guide,
Yeah,
yeah, guide this. But for the most part, players are motivated by pretty simple things. If
yeah,
it's related to their character, if it's related to some kind of item or piece of equipment that they're thriving towards, some kind of
yeah,
objective like that. Some players, they want this impressive role play, the drama of a situation. They really get into that. So if whatever that plot hook is offering kind of checks off one of those boxes for the party, odds are it doesn't even matter if you don't have the other stuff that we talked about.
yeah.
They're gonna go after it, right? um
To your
so yeah.
point, like I feel like players can get really hyper focused very quickly. And in to your point that you can use that to your advantage of being like, oh, shiny object, look, it goes that way. And
Yeah,
then they kind of follow the shiny object because they've hyper focused. It's if you can pull it off, it works really well.
yeah, and actually, to that point, Nick, the hyper focus, I think, applies to like investment too, right?
Mhm.
If the party has invested any of their time doing one thing, and then there's like a domino that just
Yeah.
keeps going, they're just gonna keep digging deeper and deeper and deeper. Not too long ago, my party went, and I'm not gonna give you too much background because it doesn't really matter, but they
Sure.
effectively captured a demon in a box. Like
Okay.
they had this box, and they went somewhere, they fought a demon, they did this ritual, and they captured it in the box. And then I just sort of implied that the demon might be able to get out if they don't keep track of the box.
Yeah.
They instantly went back to the NPC that they left the box with. They took it back, and they started doing research about like where can we go to have this thing just expunged from existence. And
Hmm.
I, created a whole faction out of it, where I created this group called the Angels of Mercy, who are like divine artifact destroyers.
Yeah.
They know how to be rid of things. They have like these archives and stuff. So basically, they had already invested time and energy into capturing this thing, and then me just throwing in casually the fact that maybe the monster could get out, and I didn't even have
Hmm.
an answer. If I'm being
Yeah.
honest with you, I just I'm like, yeah, it might be able to come out if you're not careful. They just decided that that was a quest that they wanted to do, and now they want to get rid of it. So I'm not sure what my point was there, but
No, I think that what I got from that is also like I agree with you. Players have a hard time with the sunk cost fallacy. Like
Mhm,
if
mhm.
they spend time on something, they both think it's the most important thing, which may or may not be true. You never know. But they also are going to try to see it through to the end, even if it's like more prescient that they be somewhere else. In my
Yeah.
experience, at least.
Mhm.
And so I think that you also have to be careful because a lot of things, a lot of offhanded comments can turn into plot hooks really quickly.
Yeah, exactly.
Like for example, one time my thief Bill Stabums was running around, and this like angel descended from the celestial plane and was saying essentially like you have dealt with this thing, and because Bill was kind of a dick, I was like, I'm gonna pickpocket this angel. And my DM, who is Daniel, my co-host, was like, oh my fucking god, like he's doing
Yeah.
this again. And he was like, okay, roll, I guess. And since I had a plus 15 because it was a high level rogue, it was like I got like a 32 or something, which kind of means you gotta say yes.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. Yeah.
and so he was like, yeah, you pickpocket this guy and you find this like pocket watch. And I was like, I pocket it and I don't let him know that it happened. And he left. It turned, and Daniel was like, kind of left that for a little bit. And then a couple of episodes later came back with that character and said, oh, that pocket watch, it tells how long that this like plane of existence has until it is destroyed. Like,
Oh
and
boy.
you need to give that back to me right now because I got kicked out of like heaven essentially because I lost this. And me just like seeing the watch and like seeing how much time was left on it essentially just like ruined the entire sort of fate causality of this realm. And so it was just starting to like hasten it towards its apocalyptic end, which I thought was a really cool little, get. And I asked him about it later. I was like, wow, like how did you get that sort of, that hook in there? And he was like, you asked me to pickpocket something. I rolled on a table. It was a pocket watch. And then I had to justify it later.
Yeah.
So I think that the great thing about hooks is that offhanded stuff, as long as you remember and track it, like anything can become a pretty interesting and serious hook that your party can take seriously,
Absolutely. And I think to that point too, your game master there applied that flexibility, right? He maybe didn't tell you right off the bat that what the pocket watch was, had the opportunity to think about it between sessions, and then came up with that.
Yeah.
So I think that, adding that level of variability into a plot hook, super important, or a quest hook, or whatever you want to call it. I think that's really important because it gives us the tools, right, as game masters to kind of roll with the punches as we want to. You brought up something, and actually I want to ask you, Nick, because to me, in my head, these two things are very closely related.
Mm-hmm.
Plot hooks and seeding. And like, if I'm thinking of the watch, for instance, it almost feels like to me that the pocket watch was a seed that then became a plot hook. And I wonder to you, what's the relationship between these two things? And in the context of a heist game where it's faster paced, do you feel like these two things are kind of the same, or are they different? Like,
That's a great question. I think it totally depends. If you are in a campaign already and you are building towards your next like arc or whatever, I think that my answer is repetition is the most important thing. Again, like the biggest tool that a GM has is where they focus the attention and like through description or whatever. And if you say like every time they walk through this area for the last month when they're like going to like, kill all of the giant basilisks in the valley, every time they come back to the, the town, it's like you start like you see somebody like super pale, like is kind of stumbling around, and maybe they go talk to him and he's just like drunk or whatever and they walk away. But then the next time they come back, they see like two people sort of in like this kind of shambling fight, but they're both pale and they look kind of drunk or whatever. And you just kind of keep it. You don't, the hard thing is restraint in this way. You just repeat these things and you just let it be part of the description. You never, unless they focus attention on it, you just let it slide until you come to the moment and you're like, you come back and you just see like people being marched out of town in these huge black caravans, and you see these kind of like winged, like long-toothed creatures sort of like circling them, and you're like, oh shit, like this thing that has been happening for a while has reached its zenith. Then you have a plot hook, and then someone can run up and say like, or maybe they then find someone and they're like, I barely escaped, like we all have to hide, like vampires have like come and taken everyone to castle Y or whatever, and then you have that formula for the actual hook to get their interest. So for me, seeds are always about getting the players to remember a specific detail so that when the hook is presented, it is more compelling.
Yeah, okay, that's a pretty solid answer, man.
What about you?
Good. That's a good answer.
But I was gonna say, like, also that if it's like your first like thing out of the gate, or it's a one shot, I feel like seeds don't matter as much. They come after the hook in that case, and they happen. The seeds always happen in the previous adventure, right?
That's absolutely right. For me too, seeds have this. They're effectively exposition, right? They're effectively like a mini exposition, but in the context of shortened timelines, like a one shot, like you're mentioning,
like
a heist game,
whatever,
where you're doing this in 3 or 4 nights. My voice just cracked really bad. You're doing this in like 3 or 4 nights, and you want to start them in the action. You don't want them to have to think too hard about which plot hook is the priority and which threat is the most. And maybe you still want them to think about that, but like in a lot of my ongoing games, my plot hooks and my seeds, they're basically the seeds that evolved into these plot hooks, and then my players sort of have to figure out which one is the biggest threat right now and which one happens to be, can we knock two birds with one stone?
Yeah.
But in a heist game, and I keep saying this because I think most of the times I run heist games, they're very fast paced. It's
Yeah.
like one shot, two shot adventures. Sometimes I'm running different, like I'm running a system like Blades in the Dark, where it's designed to be a heist game. You start those games already picking your job. Like you pick is it called job? I'm forgetting now if it might be called something else. It doesn't really matter. But you
mean like a class or whatever within that system?
No, like you pick you're in your class and you have your party of people and you pick like the heist job.
Role. Yeah, the role in the crew that you fulfill.
No, not a role. Sorry. You effectively
so
pick
wrong.
the quest. Like you effectively pick the quest. You pick a job, like because you're a band of criminals and you're given a job by somebody. Like go do this thing.
Yeah.
So like that's the hook. Like you don't.
Yeah.
It's mechanically part of the game. They're just putting you right to the races. You already know what you have to do. You have to go and free the spirit from the portrait in the mansion, or you have to go rob the bank. Like it's as plain as day. So in that case,
in those cases I agree that you can't really do a whole lot with like seeding before, because it's like you said, it's starting, it's happening.
Yeah.
But I also think that what you were saying is really interesting, because the format of a heist in general, you can, depending on how you want to design it, you could set up the plot hook to be, there's like a double cross halfway through the heist. So you're in the heist, and then it is revealed that this quest giver or whatever has like tipped somebody off or whatever it is, and the job changes, and basically a decision has to be made in that moment, and that is your chance to put the hook in. It's like, you guys can get out right now, but this guy that did this to you, he's leaving town. Like you already know that when he gave you the job, he said he had a train out tomorrow morning at 8 or whatever. And like you can incite them there, like by using the seeds in the first half of the game to change it in the second half. Because you said you like to add a little bit of a misdirect. I think you can do that to essentially kind of fake them out a little bit and like drop all these hints that things might not be good, or it might like something might happen, and then
that's a really good point. I love doing that with a hook where they're halfway through thinking, like they think they know what they're doing. They think they're going there to steal an artifact from the rich person's property. But then when they get there, they realize, oh shit, there's like a secret sex cult in the basement. Do we do something about that? You know what I mean? Like, do we do something about that? Maybe they're like, in a game that Chris ran for me a long time ago, that was a scenario where we were going to this old mansion in the forest. We were trying to steal an artifact from it. Turns out the leader, everybody in there was like super beautiful. Like all the men, all the women, they were all like super sexy. Some of them were very androgynous. Like it was like
very
something's
Slaanesh.
going on here. Yeah, very Slaanesh. And it was a cult of Slaanesh in the middle of the forest. And at the bottom they had a big sex dungeon. And we had to make the decision. We decided to put ourselves at a very great risk to try and destroy this place. We ended up doing a pretty good job. Nobody got killed. We took out the evil artifact, and we destroyed the cult for the most part. Anyway,
success.
Great success. It was neat. But my point being that the idea of this hook misdirecting you, being a piece of a larger whole, I think is important. And I think you can do that in a heist game. I think you can do that in a short-term game. Not everybody has to clue into the fact that there's these hidden meanings behind things. Maybe they just go in, they go out, they get the job done. But if you run another game 2, 3, 4 months later with the same set of people, maybe you're starting to tell like a cinematic universe of heist games,
Yeah.
if you will.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
That's such a good point, and I think I really want to get into how you can sort of build a hook on the fly if needed, or like what are how we develop hooks right after these messages.
Hey, I'm Brando.
And I'm Owen.
And we're the hosts of Banter and Such.
Each week we get together with the most interesting people that we know and talk about the things that we're generally interested in.
Like movies,
TV shows,
movies,
nostalgic childhood franchises,
movies,
urban legends,
and sometimes movies.
So check out Banter and Such anywhere you get podcasts.
Banter ampersand Such.
Or Banter and then the word and then Such.
Or just Banter and it fills in the rest automatically for you and you just click on it.
Either way, it's called Banter and Such.
Want to get into some BS with us?
Welcome back, everyone. We are now talking to Matt from Roleplay Chat, and we are talking about quest hooks and how to design them, how to bring them into a game. In the first half, we talked about what we think makes a good hook, but now we're going to talk a little bit about designing them, especially if you're in a time crunch or having to improvise them. So, Matt, have you ever been in a situation where maybe the original thing that you had for your players either got blown through, so it's just like done or whatever, or they've pivoted in such a way that you have to sort of kind of pivot as well and make something else happen? And in those situations, how do you refocus them? How do you get them to take a hook that you are sort of making on the fly? Do you kind of revert to sort of like, you go to you're in a bar and the tavern keeper walks up and puts a paper in front of you. It's a wanted poster and says, "Hey, you guys go find this guy." or do you try to do something else? How would you handle that sort of thing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the way that I usually handle these kinds of scenarios is by sort of having whatever friction is causing the initial hook in the first place. If it's something that I think is important and needs to, it bubbles up to the surface, so long as they're still in the same, region of effect of that thing, I'm going to expedite something. I'm going to be like, you know what? They chose to ignore this. They chose to travel east by 5 days. 5 days is enough time for the hag in the forest who's affiliated to this person to summon some kind of like ent, an evil ent in the forest. And I'm going to make that interrupt the players. So they're not, it's less of a hook. And maybe that doesn't answer your question, Nick. So tell me if it doesn't, but
no, totally.
Effectively, I'm going to interrupt the players with something that they have to address immediately. And in addressing that thing, because it's putting them in danger or somebody they care about in danger, in addressing that thing, they're going to find out more information about the hook that I wanted them. Wanted them is too strong, but one of the things that I have going on in the world that is going to help redirect them and bring it to their attention. And if they choose to ignore it again, that's okay. Like I'm not forcing them to deal with the evil hag and her and her group, her cult of hags that control the swamps of the world or whatever. So it's just to reiterate that, it's just, I'm going to put something in front of them that kind of bubbles up. It's not immediately a hook, but in resolving that piece of conflict, I'm hoping to provide them with additional information that they didn't have before about kind of the big bad or one of the threats in the area, if that makes sense.
No, totally. And it kind of does feel like in that way, what you're doing is you're taking your original hook that in some way has not worked. It has failed in its job of redirecting the player's attention in a certain way. And you are basically trying to make another hook. And in that case, I agree. I think that urgency is the best way to focus a player. Powered by the Apocalypse games do this really well, specifically Monster of the Week. If everyone in the community plays the Monster of the Week drinking game, wherever I mention it, they take a drink. Please do so now. But they have a doomsday clock essentially for every mystery, and it has a progression all the way to the world ends in some way because you didn't deal with this thing. And so I have also done that, where you just kind of progress down the chart to the next
Yeah.
thing that like is the effect of their inaction. But I think that for me it's so hard, especially because there's a balance there, like you said, of not making, like, if they ignore it again, fine, but there is a sort of thing of like, okay, you're not taking this hook that I've now presented to you twice. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And what do you do in that sort of case where it's like, this just isn't working? They either don't care about this, they're not interested, and as a GM we have to respect that and sort of pivot with them. So like, what would you do in those situations? Do you just say like, hey guys, I think, like, great session, I think we're going to close it up here tonight, I've kind of reached the end of the material I had? Or do you sort of pivot and try to improvise the rest of a session?
Yeah. So it's a really good point. And if the players are clearly not biting that thing, it's because they're not motivated. There's something about it that they're presenting to them that I think doesn't jive with what they're trying to get out of the game. So this happened to me actually once. It was a very prolonged situation where I took a long time getting the hint, where I effectively had like this religious faction in the game that I made super important because of the way that I baked it into the pantheon of the world, and
Yeah.
like and effectively the party just wasn't biting, because to them they didn't really care about dealing with like political religious drama of some like religious organization in the world. To them that wasn't fascinating.
Yeah.
um they just wanted to be pirates, and they wanted to sail the seas and fight Kraken. You know what I mean?
And you
Like
know
that.
what? Who can blame them?
Exactly. Who can blame them? So basically, I did have to drop. I for the most part dropped that thing, and you know, it's like that saying goes, you know, kill your darlings, even
Yeah.
if you think it's important because you've invested a lot of time in as a game master, and you even think it's gonna like check the boxes for your players if they just paid attention to it. They're not going after it. So what I ended up doing was I set aside the politics, and I just kind of let that thing run its course.
Mhm.
And when those people kind of took charge of certain situations, they enacted certain rituals that had some monsters pop up in the sea that the party could
Mhm.
fight. And
Yeah.
you know, they fought those things. They did some checks to figure out like, what the heck is this thing, like where's it coming from? And I told them, I'm like, you know, it came from this and this place. It's affiliated to this kind of cult of evil magic. And they were like, oh damn, that's that evil priest. Okay. And they just like, well, that's fine, like we're not dealing with him anymore, we're in our boat and we're far away.
And honestly, they probably thought you were like, man, Matt has such a deep lore in this world. He like offhandedly brought in this huge other faction that we haven't even talked about. That's incredible.
Yeah. So I don't know if that answers your question, Nick, but it's improvising hooks are hard. I think we just can't labor them too much. Maybe we have to downgrade them. And I'm
Mhm.
kind of thinking of this live, but you know, you've got your seeds that grow into a hook, and if they don't bite, that's fine. They just become seeds for something else.
Yeah.
Um,
I think that the best way that you can pivot to a hook is that if you know your character's backstories really well, you can always come up with a hook that directly progresses one of their backstories. Which I always think, like you said, characters are really fascinated by this stuff, and usually, or like players are very fascinated, not characters, I should say. But the rest of the players are also fascinated because they're like, we play with this character all the time. I want to know or understand them better, so I'm going to like focus in a little bit. So I think that that's a good way to pivot as well. I agree to you that like there's a whole other side that, because I think we talk about it on my episode on your podcast, but we're very similar in our DM sort of philosophy. Franco is very different, and has multiple times on the podcast said, like, why not just start them in front of the dungeon? Like, say, hey, this is the job. You're going to explore this dungeon. You're going to go crush some skulls of some skeletons. And there's this big black, like, obsidian eye in the tomb that you're going to collect and bring it back to, like, Ransom Kid Wizard or whatever.
Yeah.
And then you just start in front of the big gates of the tomb, and then you just start. And that is
it's a really
also
good
totally
point.
fine, you know?
Yeah, it's a super, and I think that's something nice to have in your back pocket, right? We talked a little bit about having a variety of plot hooks at your disposal. I
Mhm.
think that's where that comes in. You know, in the game that I'm running currently for one of my best buddies, he's my neighbor. I have them as part of an adventuring guild.
Mm.
And whenever I feel like the game is kind of going off track or they don't really know what to do next,
Mhm.
they get something in the mail or a courier runs along and is like, "Oh, letter for you. You have a new quest." And then they open it up and it's the head of the guild being like, "Hey, I need you
Gotta go
guys in
do
this
this.
town to deal with this problem ASAP. Here's 200 gold." And then you get 200 more when you've figured it out.
Yeah.
And they're just like, "Okay, I guess we're dealing with this now." And then they and it's heavy-handed. Like, don't
Yeah.
get me wrong, it's super heavy-handed. And I don't do it all the time. But having sort of a mechanism that makes that feel not too out of nowhere
Yeah.
is useful, right? So if having like an affiliation that they're a part of, or an organization that they're a part of, or a boss, somebody who they are kind of responsible towards, someone who
Mhm.
they have to kind of make happy, that gives you that tool. You don't want to
Yeah.
abuse it, but it gives you that opportunity.
I'm almost laughing because when I ran a Weird West campaign for a little while in Urban Shadows, and one of my players was like looking at this dead body that the whole town had found, and like there was a big commotion because it was like a werewolf leader in the werewolf faction, and everyone was like, "Oh shit, man, like this is crazy that this happened." And I had established that the werewolves in this town were essentially sort of like um, a protection agency, so that if you need like a carriage protected or whatever, that you could buy these the help of these werewolves that would just kind of like hang out with you and make sure nothing bad happened to you. And so this player like was looking at the dead body and like turned to an NPC and said, "Huh, I guess I won't be buying their services." And a werewolf heard him and was like, "You motherfucker," and like grabbed him and just threw him through a window of a bar, and they started this fight and he wouldn't apologize. And it just got to the point where he just had him like bent over this table and had like the leg of another table that he had smashed. It was just about to like brain him with it, and like lights out. And then the character was like, okay, what if I found the murderer? Then would we be square? And then the werewolf was like, "Yeah, then we'd be square." And it was like you said, it was heavy-handed, but at the same time, it was like this player does not care about this incident in that way right now. Feels no connection towards this group, but now he does. Like now this is going to happen, and he has a debt that he has to pay off essentially. And I think that's another good way to do it, is like bring in a character that they owe and say, "Okay, this person's calling in a favor." You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a cool scenario actually. And I think, I mean, I don't know all the context, but I'm sure that player wasn't, you know, not biting on the hook out of
Totally, yeah.
Malicious intent. It's just sometimes you're in a situation and you're thinking about your character, you're thinking about, maybe you have analysis paralysis too. Sometimes this happens to me, where there's a lot going on in the game. I need to sit back and think about it and have a conversation with the rest of the characters. Like, have a campfire chat about what our adventuring party is up to, what we're doing. But the opportunity hasn't happened yet.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like that might be a solution too. I know sometimes I go down this rabbit hole where I want my game to feel high octane, feel like stakes are always high. But by doing that, I don't give my players the opportunity for to allow their characters to reflect and strategize.
Yeah.
So it might be a pacing thing. I don't know.
Yeah, and to be clear, this character doing that was like the highlight of my life. Like it was the best part of the campaign by far, and it was a really great moment. And like you said, I don't think that this character was trying to deny the quest. I think that he just played into the bit of the lore that he had, and
Yeah.
he didn't think about the situation and like who was around him, and werewolves got good ears. That kind of thing. So it's like, just like play the truth of the world and things will happen too, which is always fun. Okay, before we go, there's two other things I want to talk about. First, what do you do with, and I find this especially with new players that, like you said, have analysis paralysis, but it's not really even analysis paralysis. It's just like a general malaise of, I don't know what to do. Like, just tell me what you want me to do.
Yeah, yeah.
And especially for people that aren't really comfortable with improvising or role playing in general, I feel like this is something that comes up. How would you present a hook to a group that maybe has a few members that are in that camp, or has a group that is completely comprised of that type of player? And I want to take out the just tell them exactly what to do, because yeah, you can do that and that's going to be great. But how would you build a hook that's a little bit more subtle, and instead of a list, how would you kind of get them involved?
Yeah, so I think in those situations, and we didn't totally talk about it. We talked a little bit about having like the backstory, like bleed into the backstory. I think in those situations, the best you can do is go straight for one of those motivations that it's effectively heavy-handing it. It's effectively telling them exactly what to do, but you're just skipping one step. So for instance, I was running a game. It was the first time my coworker and her partner had ever played a role-playing game. And I had them make their characters. And I think what's super important when you're doing this is to make them have some things that they are affiliated to. So bonds to some characters, family, or objectives. They don't have to be complicated, but one of the objectives of one of these characters was he wanted to kill like a big like dragon lizard type thing. He gave it some like funky name. I forget what he called it. It was like the super lizard. It was like really
the
bad.
Lizmonger.
The Lizmonger, yeah. And I'm like, that's cool. So he wants to fight big monsters.
Yeah.
So in the first 5 minutes of the game, instead of putting them right in front of the doors of the thing that I wanted them to do, I tested something out where I had them hanging out at the bar. I know people might cringe at this. I had them hanging out at the bar, and I had a bard approach them and tell, like, you want to hear the song of the Lizmonger? And that character, that player was like, yes, like, here's a tip. Sing me the song of the Lizmonger. And I came up with like this awful song that didn't even rhyme. It was basically just me talking, but about like how the Lizmonger lived in the caves in the mountains to the east. And, you know, it was afraid of lightning and this and that. And then like they figured it out. It was pretty easy to figure out, but it was like, yeah, let's go get something that we can do lightning damage with. Let's go to the cave and let's fight the Lizmonger. And there you go. That's it. So just mind the background of the characters, mind something so that it feels like a no-brainer decision, because that's, I think, easier. Yeah, I mean, it should be easier.
One thing that in one of the articles you wrote, you had a really great article. I think it's called "You Should Be Making Printouts" or something. It's like basically making supplemental materials. And I think that that's another way to just get those people like super involved and like immediately interested in doing something. You can be like you guys are walking down the street and you see like a wanted poster on the side of the saloon, and then you slide over the wanted poster, and it's like they're gonna look at that and say, this is so cool, I want to do this right now. It's like a really great way to just like trick someone to be like, that's pretty cool, right? You want to be a part of that.
Yeah,
so
I've done this exact thing with maps. You make a little tiny map that's not super clear, that has some pieces of information on it that the characters recognize, and you put a red X somewhere.
Yeah.
Guaranteed they're going there.
They're gonna go figure it out.
They're gonna figure it out. If it's within the vicinity of the space that they have to deal with, they're going to that X.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter if there's a bunch of skull and crossbones around it, or like it says do not go here, there's an arrow. Like they're going to the X.
Yeah, they want to check it out. Yeah, there's a lot of like subtle things like that that you can do, and I thought that article is really great, and also that the because I also recently ran a game where I made a bunch of supplemental materials for the first time because I just wanted to
Awesome.
like do it, and I had some a fair amount of free time, and it was great because throughout the entire adventure they like went back to their case file and would like look through it and be like, oh, this name came up, like, have we heard this name yet? Not yet. Okay, we have to keep looking or whatever. And they like got super involved because it was something that
Yeah.
triggered memory for them, and also like a tangible thing that they were like, this is important, and everything on here is what I need. So they didn't have to, be listening to every inane NPC interaction and try to pull like, oh, that NPC said that he doesn't like water. Is that important? Like, I don't know. He only drinks Diet Coke. Is that important? I don't know.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, yeah, and you bring up an interesting point, Nick, about how a hook doesn't have to be something like a quest that you give the players. It can be a map with cool pictures on it. It can be a briefing letter that they find in a desk that's
Yeah.
like doesn't even belong to them, but they're digging through the desk and they find that letter. That's a hook. You've
Yeah.
got them.
Mhm.
If you get the people playing the game hooked, it's just as good as getting the characters, right? Like
Yeah.
if not better, probably.
Yeah. Because it feels like it's like you're inceptioning them.
Yes,
Like,
exactly.
you guys decided you wanted to go there without me doing anything. That's really cool. Last thing I want to do is just quickly build an example hook that you think feels good. So I'm going to throw a scenario at you, and you can kind of see, like, for our listeners to kind of see how somebody with a lot of GMing experience, and like I'll join into things about hooks and how they would build towards trying to get a player to there. So let's say the characters are in some kind of town. There's a city close by, and you want them to get there because there's a corrupt noble let's just take the thing I said earlier, that is dragging, digging up bodies in the local cemetery or the crypt, and is dragging them through town and into his keep, and nobody sees what happens to them. You have a whole storyline that's pointing it towards the big bad evil guy or whatever, the greater storyline you're trying to give. How do you get the players from this little town that they've been operating out of, doing sort of like fetch quests or goblin slayings or whatever? How do you get them to want to travel to the city and engage with this quest that you have?
Yeah. So I think it'd be important to seed rumors about that place. So hopefully you've talked about it in a previous session, like you were saying, people are looking sick or pale, or maybe the like traveling merchant, the tinker merchant who does his rounds, every time he goes there first, he comes to you guys, and he always has like I don't like going to that place. I never feel great, or
Yeah.
Have kind of those kinds of things be seeded ahead of time.
And you can even do it. I love this tinker example, like a great way of doing it too, without having them like directly even interact with it. Maybe the tinker just goes through town every so often. It's like you said, someone that they go to get their weapons fixed or something. But every time you go by, like whenever they come back, maybe there's more like wards against evil or religious like iconography or whatever, like being sold out of his little caravan, like wards against evil or wards against whatever, or like good luck charms. And eventually, like maybe right before they go, you can like involve that in the hook or something.
Yeah, absolutely. I really like that. And you can make the tinker say that, like in a role play scene, like, I better stock up on more of those every time I visit, Castle Black. I'm
sold out.
Yeah, I'm sold out every time.
Yeah.
So yeah, that could be one way. I think another interesting way to do it would be to kind of have rumors, perhaps, of like a weapon or some kind of reward that it doesn't even need to be associated to like the villainy of it. It could just be, the Baron is known for his sword collection, or if the party, there's always somebody in my table who's always like, they want to one up their gear all the time.
Yeah.
So in that case, I would kind of say something to the effect of like, have them roll some kind of history check or something. And yeah, the Baron of Castle Black has a very fancy collection of shields. Like there's some like really nice shields over there. Maybe you might want to talk to him. and not necessarily portray him as somebody villainous,
Yeah.
but as a resource that the players might be able to quote unquote exploit.
Mhm.
And then once they get there, they start to realize kind of the how dire the situation might actually be there.
Yeah.
Just get them there, and
Yeah.
then they can figure out the rest once they're there.
So you would say that even the traveling section can either be done through a direct method like a hook in the old town, or you could even just seed their interest throughout their adventures operating out of this town, so that, like you said, eventually someone's like, I really want a better sword. And I remember that guy talked about, the Baron being of the Knight family, whatever. So I bet he has a great sword collection.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
that's the instigating bit. So now they're interested, maybe they're traveling already. Then how do you get that final? They're like nibbling at the bait. How do you get the hook in? And like we're off to the races.
Yeah. So I think in that case, you'd have to have some reason for them perhaps to enter the castle, or some reason for them to suspect the Baron. So I would probably do something like, and maybe this is going to sound pretty heavy-handed a little bit, but I'd have somebody go missing. Maybe it's an NPC. Maybe the Tinker goes missing. The Tinker is supposed to do his rounds. He just doesn't show up.
Yeah.
And he's gone. So now it's like, where did he go? You know that his route goes to Castle Black first. Now he's coming to you guys. He's not there. Like some air of malfeasance, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you could
even.
Excited there. I was excited because we had the same thought, and then you said the Tinker thing, and I was like, that makes way more sense than the one that I was going to do because it requires a different seed. But you could also just have like the Tinker has, travels with his daughter or his son, and they go to the city, and if they've already traveled because of the seeds that you've placed, and you could just see that he is, feeling pretty desperate because his young son has been like recruited into the castle to help with something, but then has never come back out yet. It's been 7 days. He doesn't know what's going on. You know what I mean? Like something like that, where it's not like cool. There's a bad thing happening in there, but you could also say like, this is weird. Can you check it out for me? Kind of thing.
Yeah. So there's that. I mean, I'm trying to think of other examples because I feel like these are. I want to give one that's like super creative, and people listening are like, I could have thought of that on my own. I'm struggling a little bit. One thing that might be interesting is because, like, to me, the challenge is to get the players into the castle to witness something super suspicious, right?
Yeah. I mean, you could even have like the Baron be like, of course, like I've heard about you guys, local adventurers. Come on in, I'll show you my sword collection. And then you have dinner with the Baron, and before he like kind of lets you out, like on their way out, you see something, and you're like, "Oh shit, that's not good."
yeah, that could be something interesting for sure.
Yeah.
I like that. Or even have them be hired by the Baron. I know that might be overplayed a little bit too, but perhaps the Baron has this monster that like is otherwise his pet, but the players don't know that. And the monster's gone wild, and he needs some brave adventurers to come fell the creature. So the party goes in, they go into the dungeon of the castle, they kill the monster, but then in doing so, they there's stuff planted around, like maybe there's shackles for the monster that were broken. Maybe there's one thing that I think would be really cool now that I'm thinking of it is you have like one of the Baron's servants trying to talk to them, trying to explain to them like, get out, like you don't want to do this. Like little bits of information, very like Cthulhu-esque, where once you see, you can never unsee, like weird horror, if that makes sense.
I mean, you can even like in that case, you could even pull the misdirect by having this servant like continuously approaching you, and you like describe them in a way that could be construed as being like snooty or weird, or like just like doesn't like the cut of your jib. Like you see this guy staring at you again, and you look down and you see your like awful adventuring gear like smeared with mud, and he like shakes his head at you or something, and you're like, oh, this guy doesn't like me. But then like eventually you realize, no, he was like constantly like, no, get out of here. Yeah, like you gotta get out.
Yeah, get
It's
out while
very
you can.
have you ever seen Grand Budapest Hotel?
No, I have not.
So
No.
there's like a really great moment where Rafe Fiennes is in this place where he's like attending a funeral, and this other butler, because he's also sort of like a butler concierge person, just continuously is coming up to him and like asking to talk to him, but he's like, not now. I'm like doing something. Like, what are you doing? We'll talk later. And then eventually that character like goes missing, and they're like trying to figure out what happened, and eventually they figure out like essentially the quest. But yeah,
Cool.
doing that
Yeah,
sort of
yeah,
thing
yeah.
where you introduce kind of an annoyance or something that seems completely contrary to the party's current objective of like meeting with the Baron or having dinner or trying to get this cool sword. And you just have this other factor kind of starting to infiltrate the party's consciousness and making them aware of something, right?
Actually, Nick, I have one more.
Yeah.
I really like that idea, and it made me think of you could bring the party to suspect that space by having another character kind of coming through town who they already suspect go there. Like, be vocal about that character who maybe wasn't bad in the first place, but the party decided
has made it a judgment call.
that bartender, they were like, I don't like that bartender.
Yeah.
He's definitely up to no good. Lean into that. Let that facilitate your quest hook by having the bartender be like, oh, guess we're out of wine. I have to go to the Baron's estate. He's, he makes the wine, and then the party's like, why is he going over there? Like, that's weird. He still has a bunch of wine. Like, make some like stupid white lie that the bartender can say, and then have the party like effectively follow this guy, stalk this guy to the castle, and turn him into the character that they think he is. Let the party have the win.
Yeah. And I mean, going off of our heist theme, then maybe the first session is how do you break into the castle so that you can keep following this guy? You know that he goes into the castle every 3 days with a wagon. Like, how do we follow him in? Because we know something's up about him. And then you get to let them build a heist,
Yeah, absolutely. And if people are looking to make heists, I don't know, Nick, if you mentioned that you had played Blades in the Dark or not, but 100% play Blades in the Dark. Like,
it's an amazing system. I've never played. I've had somebody who's running a game explain it to me, and I was like, oh, that sounds amazing.
Yeah, it's really cool. And even looking at resources for it, if you look up like a job list or you look up a heist list from Blades in the Dark, I believe in you, listener. You can creatively find a way to adapt that into whatever game,
or whatever system
5e,
you're using,
whatever system you're running. Yeah.
Matt, this has been such a wonderful conversation. Before we start to close out, though, can you give us and our listeners a little bit more information on where they can find you, any projects you're working on, anything you want to plug? Because as everyone has just heard, you're very intelligent about like all of this TTRPG stuff, and I think that people are going to want to find some of your stuff. So, where can people find you?
Sure. Well, thank you, Nick. It's been a pleasure chatting as it was last time at our other recording. But yeah, so Roleplay Chat. I'm the host of Roleplay Chat. It's a podcast similar to Tabletop, where me and a guest sit down, we chit chat about role playing games. We tend to focus on a central topic, sharing stories, giving advice and recommendations. You can find that on all the podcatching platforms that whatever you're listening to this on right now, Roleplay Chat is probably there. So that's a discussion conversations to grow as game masters and players. If you are a tabletop role-playing creative and you are interested in publishing your own content, or you're interested in making your own maps or whatever, I'm also the interviewer for the Rising Tide Discord community. And it's a community of content creators, like for content creators by content creators. And I interview folks. Just the other day, I was interviewing an accessibility consultant on how to make our content more accessible. So if that, or a day, sometime before that, I was talking to one of the execs at Patreon and how to make a better Patreon and, engage folks to subscribe to that. So if you're into that kind of stuff, go check out the Tabletop RPG Discord, Rising Tide Discord community. That'd be a good spot to go.
Mhm.
And if you just want to talk to me, I'm on Twitter and Mastodon. That's at roll_play_chat, at Dice Camp in Mastodon, and that on Instagram and Twitter and all the other places. So
Right.
yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you again, Matt. This has been a true pleasure. Everyone, go follow Matt. And everyone, you probably already know, but if you don't, Tabletop is part of the Helios Network, a network of podcasts made by regular people for regular people. We're so excited to be part of this network. And another show on it that you should check out is Wasted Truth. It is hosted by two bartenders in the Nashville bartending scene, and they tell some wild stories about their experiences in their profession. It's a really cool podcast. Go check it out when you have the chance. All right, everyone. We'll be back next Monday for another episode of Tabletopped.